Wow, look at that. That's
Very
quite that's quite the little backdrop.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh. That's
How you
very
been?
good. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything looks good on your end. Yeah, look at all this Curtis. Oh my
Oh
gosh.
yeah. It's I have a couple of the similar, the same image but in multiple mediums, and then
Oh my gosh. Oh
you
yeah.
got to come visit sometime.
Oh, I'm coming. A friend of mine's son's going to Boston College, and I already said, I've got a friend I'm going to go visit. So when I go there, I'll take you out for lunch. So I've already
That's
committed in
perfect.
my brain to getting out there.
All
So
right, that
it's
sounds great.
wonderful. Well, thank you, Tim Peterson, for coming to be on my podcast. We've been trying to do this for a while, and sometimes it seems like the gods are against us, but finally today they are not. So I'm
Yeah.
very
No,
excited to have you on.
I appreciate it. I know it's been a journey to get here, but it's fine. Uh, I appreciate the time.
All great things are a journey, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think you know that as well as anyone because you're so intrigued with Lewis and Clark, the ultimate
Yeah.
in journeys, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that that was one of my first passions when it came into the art world and art collecting was kind of the Lewis and Clark material and just that whole story and what they went through and what it kind of says about teamwork and perseverance and willing to work with different cultures and try to both learn about a different culture but learn about the environment and learn about nature and the ability to kind of have a team that sticks together through some tough times and still gets through it.
Yeah,
So
years.
I think it's an amazing story.
When did you first learn about that? Do you remember?
You know, Mark, I don't really remember exactly. I just, I the big thing that kind of sticks in my mind is when I read the Undaunted Courage by Stephen Ambrose,
Yeah,
as
great
I'm sure
writer.
many people have. And once I kind of got into that, then I got very hooked on that story. And then over the period of time, then I hooked up with, Charlie Fritz on the Lewis and Clark collection. And then that just takes a whole nother course, which I'm sure we'll talk about
Oh
at
yeah,
some.
definitely. Well, and tell some people who might not know what that 1804 to 1806 journey was for Lewis and Clark, because it is, instrumental in opening up of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically an expedition that basically explored the area really west of the Mississippi, attempting to find a waterway from basically St. Louis all the way to, the West Coast. They were hoping to find a waterway, which they did not.
Right.
Um, but it was, a journey that was put on by, the commissioned by Thomas Jefferson and the Congress, and these two gentlemen with a team of, depending on when they were in the journey, somewhere between 25 and 35 other men went on this 2 year adventure and did it both for geographical reasons, exploration reasons, trading reasons, you name it.
Hmm.
So it was interesting process.
The reason I'm bringing it up because we might as well talk about Charlie Fritz because I think that's when I first learned about you is through,
Oh, okay.
yeah, through Charlie Fritz. So Charlie, as he's this amazing artist, fantastic artist, and and I would get pieces from him occasionally. And then he told me one day, he goes, "Yeah, I really can't give you any more work at all because I'm working on this project that I want to do." And I don't know how many years did he work on that thing?
It was over a decade.
Oh my
I
God.
think it was a 10-year process. And
Wow.
then, that's the thing that I always am fascinated by when I look at some of the artists that I'm most intrigued by. It's whether it's someone like Catlin or Bodmer or Edward Curtis, who you see behind me,
Right.
or Charlie Fritz. These are artists that dedicate a significant part of their life to a project. Um, And in many cases, they end up being done with that journey and that process, and they don't get the, they don't get the notoriety. They surely don't get the money or
Right.
the fame that you think they would get after doing that. So, I had heard that Charlie Fritz was going to do this series of paintings on Lewis and Clark that would be something that he would be using to help market the bicentennial in 2004 to 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll talk about it, I'm sure, later on kind of my other relationships with artists. But I called him up out of the blue and I said, what are you going to do with your paintings? And he said, well, I think, we're going to try to get them to travel around in different museums around the country for a while. And then when it's done, I'm envisioning selling them off. And so I talked to him about that for a while. And then I spent a little more time thinking about it. And then Charlie and I talked a couple times, and we kind of got to the point where he recognized that maybe what we really should do is build this story of Lewis and Clark, and maybe it'd be better, instead of just selling it at the end and having a bunch of paintings all scattered, that it might be better as a historical and an educational component to keep it together. And so Charlie and I talked. I came up with the idea of, at one point, Charlie I think was working on like 60, 65 paintings. I said, you know what, we really ought to do it from a whole process of kind of from start to finish, try to hit the key points. And the number 100 seemed like a logical number to me.
Yeah.
And so we kind of agreed on 100 paintings of Lewis and Clark. And so we kind of spent time where he had some ideas already. I had some ideas. And over the course of many years, he did this 100 paintings of Lewis and Clark. And,
Mm-hmm.
it took over a decade to do. He dedicated pretty much full time for that period.
He did. I know he did.
And most of those paintings were done at the specific location on the same date as they were depicted in the journals. So if they were in Fort Mandan in North or South Dakota in the winter, he was at Fort Mandan in the winter. And so that's why it also took so long for the paintings, is at some point he couldn't keep up with the journey, so he'd have to go wait a whole year to go to the next stage. So anyway, we did that. We worked on that together. He did all the hard work. I just kind of gave my guidance and perspective. And at the end of it, I own a collection of 100 paintings. It's traveled now kind of pretty much continuously for 20 years.
Wow.
Been at 13 different museums around the country.
Yeah.
Probably seen by over 3 to 5 million people.
Wow.
So it's been I think most people that see it in its entirety in person are much more moved by it than just the book that we did.
I was, for sure.
So, and
especially
I think,
the size of some of these paintings are just monumental.
Yeah. And I think it's, what's appealing to it for many people is there's a lot of artists that a lot of people don't know anything about, whether it's, Albert Bierstadt or Thomas Moran or Alfred Jacob Miller or other great historical artists. But almost everybody, whether it was in 4th grade elementary school history classes, almost everybody has heard of Lewis and Clark. So the ability to kind of go and see something that you have some familiarity with, I think is quite appealing to a typical audience, because they at least feel they have some base to start with. And then over the course of the years, I've included some bronzes to go with the exhibit to basically turn the 100 paintings from a flat art collection to a collection of not just flat art, but 3D sculpture.
And
So
so what does that feel like to, I mean, there must be some great, gratitude to know so many people have seen this collection that could have been broken up and never really seen,
yeah,
but it's, you own it, you supported an artist basically for 10 years, and now you're giving it, I'm sure it's never been in your house, so it's been out on view for the world for 20 years.
yeah. Yes, I've never had it at my home. Um, Part of the deal when Charlie and I did the agreement to do the paintings is he agreed actually to paint 102 paintings. And two of them were for my personal collection because I knew it would travel and I would never really have that in my
Right.
home. So yeah, I basically have two Charlie Fritz, Lewis, and Clark paintings in my personal collection. Um, but I think this has kind of been one of my goals for as long as I've collected is to share the, I've been fortunate to be able to do some of these things over my lifetime. And I feel like it's really important to share it with the public. And hopefully the stories that I attempt to try to show in my collections through the different museums that I work with, the goal is to not just educate people, but to motivate people to create an environment where people, as I told a group just a couple days ago, my goal has always been when people walk out of a museum for looking at any exhibit, whether it's a part of my collection or not, is I want them to either say, how did the artist do that? Or I didn't know that, or a simple word, which is wow,
Mm.
just wow. And if you can get an audience to do any one of those three things, I think you've accomplished something.
Mm.
And I think I've been fortunate. I've had a spouse over, 40 years of marriage, basically, that has been supportive of my crazy interests and willing to allow our collections to be shared by others.
Yes, and they are. I mean, and I think that's one of the things I want to get to on this podcast is trying to figure out where that comes from, because you clearly have this love of Western and Native arts, and maybe others that I don't even know about, that's very deep and long-standing. And you've spent a lot of energy and effort, not just the money, but the energy and effort's really the key, because that you can't get back, to build it and to share it, specifically to share it. And I've been to a bunch of your exhibits, and I've been to Western Spirit 50, 75 times. I don't even know. And I still get wow every time. And I always learn something and I see something. And so you're getting that, and it gives you some joy. And I kind of want to figure out where that comes from and how. So
Okay. Yeah.
tell me, I mean, I know you live in Boston area, and I know
Yep.
you've worked there and, professionally, but where did you grow up?
I grew up in Minnesota. I was born in a very small town about 30 miles from the Canadian border, but basically spent my entire youth in Rochester, Minnesota, in the
Mm.
southeastern part of Minnesota where the Mayo Clinic is.
Right.
My parents were teachers. My father eventually became an administrator in the school system. So very, very, middle class family, education focused. Um, did a lot of hunting and fishing with my father and my brother growing up and my friends. So always loved the outdoors. It was the days way before the internet and cell
Mhm.
phones. And so you found you found joy in being outside with your friends and doing things outside. And that's really what I grew up doing. And education was a big deal because our parents were teachers and educators and administrators. So I always had a firm background of how important it was to study and educate and learn and have the joy of learning and reading. My brother and my sister and I used to read a lot of books. And so I
Mm.
was always into reading as well. So
And were they history teachers by any chance? I'm just curious.
No,
What did they teach?
my mother was an elementary school teacher. My father taught everything from, driver's ed to history to you name it. He taught a little bit of everything in the senior level, and then basically became a principal and administrator shortly after
Hmm.
doing it for a while.
And were you aware of arts at that time when you were growing up, either native or Western? Did you have it in your house, or did you go visit museums like the Minneapolis Art Institute or anything?
We didn't have a lot of art in our home, fine art of by any means. Western art we had a little bit, but if you want to kind of get a little sense of my true first experience with art,
Yes, I did.
um, there was a gallery in Rochester, Minnesota. It was called Val Webb Gallery. And my father and I walked in there one day, and we were big into hunting and fishing and everything. And there was this was back in the late 60s, early 70s, when prints were a big deal,
Yes.
right? And there was a print by an artist by the name of Paul Kelly.
Oh, I know
And
exactly who that is.
yeah, it was a print of this mountain man
Yeah.
carrying a gun with a Canadian goose. And my father and I told my dad, I go, man, I love that print. And he was like, well, if you really would like it, why don't you work on your paper route? You pay for half of it and I'll pay for half of it. And then I worked on my paper route, riding a bicycle when I'm, 8 or 10 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
And we bought this print of a Paul Kelly print. And that was the start of my Western experience of collecting.
And so you're
Um,
8 or 10, and do you remember how much it cost?
I don't, I'm guessing it was probably $60.
Yeah,
So
that's a
I
lot
kind of worked
though.
the
I mean, you're
paper out.
giving your all your paper route money for that. That's a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and the funny thing is, years later, I got to know Paul Kelly as the artist and became friends with Paul. And he actually did a painting very similar to my first print.
Oh, wow.
Um, so I have an original of his that's quite similar to the print that I got,
Mhm.
partly out of nostalgia and partly because I just love the image. Um, and kind of out of tribute to Paul when he passed away from cancer. As you probably know, I worked on a Paul Kelly exhibit
Yes.
that ended up being at the Scottsdale Museum
Yes.
for, I think,
Exhaustive,
9 months.
major
Um,
important exhibit. Yeah.
yeah,
That
and
was,
I think there again, people don't realize who Paul Kelly was, but he was much more than a Western painter.
oh yeah.
This was a guy that was one of the largest people that did postage stamps for the United States government. He was the only artist that was in with Neil Armstrong while they were working on Apollo 11
Mhm.
for the lunar landing. He was considered the NASA artist. So he had all these interesting elements of his life, much beyond just Western art, that we tried to demonstrate in this exhibit we did
Yeah, I
years
remember
ago.
that exhibit, and that actually stuck out to me because I too was like, oh, I didn't really know this component. I mean, I kind of did, but I didn't. And when it's
Yeah,
all there and big pieces too,
yeah.
it's like, oh, and are most of those pieces, are they your pieces that you own?
I have a decent sized collection of Paul Kelly's material, but we borrowed a lot from different
Hmm.
parties, including the United States Postal Service, who have original
Hmm.
stamps of his and drawings of his.
Yes.
And so it was a wide variety of sources for that exhibit.
Now, I'm sure part of you goes, I want to buy all of them.
Yeah, I maybe used to think that, not anymore.
Yeah, there is a point where you go, okay, I'm
Yeah,
saturated.
yeah,
Maybe after the Curtis was that may have been
yeah,
when it
yeah.
happened.
Yeah, we can talk about
Oh,
that
we'll
later.
get into that because that's to me is really remarkable, that collection, among others, but that one is remarkable. So you're growing up in in Minnesota and
Yeah.
you like to hunt and fish. You buy your first lithic or poster print, I guess,
Yeah.
And you're 10 years
Yeah,
old.
probably 10 to 12, probably
Yeah.
something like that.
And so then did you keep looking and thinking about art or wanting to make any yourself? Did you ever have that urge to draw or to sculpt or do anything like that?
I would tell you that I I can hardly draw a stick figure. So I am not an artist. I kind of tried to draw a little bit and I was so terrible. I was like, I think I'll leave this to the professionals.
So here's the funny thing is that you really actually are an artist because I've seen your exhibits and
Yeah,
you set them all up and that's all art. It's a whole completely in design.
yeah.
So like the Curtis thing was beautiful with all the different graphics. Everything was meticulous. So you may not be able to draw a stick figure, but you sure know how to put stick figures together. So I think you can't say that. I think you are an artist. You're just not, you're a visual artist that works with other art. I think that's what it is. That's what
Yeah,
I would.
I enjoy the process.
Yes, you do.
I think a lot of people probably, including my wife, Elaine, often says, the hunt is every bit as fun or more fun than the end result.
It's
Um,
true too,
and
I'm
I
sure.
think that applies to a lot of things in life.
Sure.
Whether it's the journey of a work or the journey of hunting or fishing. In
Mm-hmm.
many cases, right, isn't about
Absolutely.
catching the fish or
Mm-mm.
shooting the pheasant. It's the process of going with your father and your brother, at 4:30 in the morning to
Right.
get to some place and having in a cold Iowa cornfield,
Mm-hmm.
getting back in the car and having a sandwich and enjoying your
Yeah.
your camaraderie with your friends or your family.
Yeah. I agree.
Um,
I think that's completely true. And so in high school, what did you want to do? What did you, I mean, I know how you ended up and what you did for a living, but what were your goals when one, I guess, go to college, right? Because you have educator parents. They probably expected that. That was probably a given.
yeah.
But did you think you were going to want to do?
I would say in high school, I really had no clue other than I wanted to get really good grades. And I was big into sports and I was big into trying to get great grades. And
Mm,
so I played football and baseball and basketball um, and then up until college, I really didn't have a goal of I wanted to be X or Y.
right.
I just wanted to get a good education and then go to a good school. Um, and so I then went to, after graduating from high school, I went to a small liberal arts college in Minnesota,
That was Kellogg.
Division III school. It was Gustavus Adolphus College
Oh,
in
okay.
Minnesota. And when I went there, I was initially thinking I was going to be a doctor. I thought I'd go into pre-med.
Mm.
I wanted to be like you, Mark.
Well, you kind of did because
Um,
I'm an art dealer and you kind of are too.
yeah, yeah. And then my sophomore year, I actually did an internship with a doctor
Smart.
and and did that for a month. And after a month of doing that, I was with a surgeon and a hematologist. I quickly realized I really didn't want to be a doctor.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting a major in economics, and thought I'd do something in the business world.
Mm.
And so I got a degree in econ from Gustavus. And then after that, actually went out after graduating from there, I went to uh, actually moved to Hartford, Connecticut with a job, my first job for a investment management company that was a subsidiary of Travelers Insurance
Yeah.
Company. And I was there for 9 months in a training program. And then I moved to Chicago. And I lived in Chicago for 4 years worked for this money management firm of the Travelers. Did that for a couple of years, and quickly also realized I was in a sales position, like a lot of people do right out of college,
Yes.
and quickly realized I didn't really have an interest in selling my whole life. I wanted to be more of an expert in something.
Mm.
Um, So I then went after that, I'm giving you a little history here, but I went to and got a chance to get a master's degree from Kellogg at Northwestern,
Hmm.
and got an MBA from Northwestern. And then after that, I then moved out to Boston, and I've been out here ever since. I worked for a mutual fund company for a couple of years, and then had the chance, after doing that for a couple of years, I had a chance to go and work for Harvard Management Company, which is the division that manages the endowment for the university.
Yeah, which is huge, right? It's the largest endowment in the country as far as for colleges and things, right?
Yep,
Yep.
yep. So I was a portfolio manager there for a little over a decade. And then after doing that for a decade, I sat down with my boss one day and I said, I think I'd like to try to go off on my own and do my own thing. And he was very supportive of it and allowed me to go off on my own and start my own firm. And yet I continued to manage the Harvard money that I had been managing. So I left and started my own firm and did that for 16, 17 years and
What
had my own money management hedge fund.
what is it, do you think, that made you go, I want to run my own ship versus working for someone? Was there something that you go, this is really, I think, my journey, not working for someone else?
Yeah, I think, it's everything from after being there for 10 years, I felt like I had accomplished something. I had done well there, but it's always like another challenge.
Yeah, that's it.
I wanted to see if I could do it.
Yeah,
I wanted to see if I could make more money. I wanted to see if I had the ability to be a leader and actually build a team and an organization.
right. The challenge.
Um, and the challenge.
Yes.
And it was, right at the time I had two young children, so it was, a little bit of a gamble, but I
Yes.
hope it paid off.
Well, it is a gamble. That's why I asked, because you have a very well positioned, highly qualified, respected job that does well, but yet you are saying, I'm going to do this other thing because I have to. And it's
Yeah,
that, because that, whatever that is of you, is the same thing that happens in your art buying and how you see that. They are the same. Going, I'm going to buy all these paintings and do this, or I'm going to learn about everything on this and do this. I think they're synonymous, and you've learned that through succeeding in doing other things in your own business. So obviously that was very successful at that time when you're doing this. And I'm sure that was super, like you said, you have two children, very busy, but were you starting to look at art at that point yet? And
yeah, it
why?
was. I would, I would, I would say that in the throes of my time at Harvard, as well as my early days starting my own firm, the stress level was pretty high.
I bet.
And I remember my wife always would say, yes, you have the kids, you have family things, but you kind of need a hobby to get mentally away from the stress of the job.
Right.
And so one of the things I thought about was I always had a love of American history because of
Mhm.
all my reading. I loved reading and American history. And I always enjoyed the outdoors and the art of the outdoors. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe I could combine my love of American history with kind of my interest in art, art of the West.
Right, specifically.
Um, and, it's everything from when I was a kid. I remember the movies like Jeremiah Johnson and
Love
Butch
that
Cassidy
movie.
and the Sundance Kid
Yeah, I
were
love that
movies
one too.
I loved, right?
Yeah,
And so between things like that and Dances with Wolves, I always had a fascination with the outdoors in the West. So I kind of combined all of those elements into starting to collect more of this artwork. And so it kind of went from, the prints in the early days were I guess to some degree I've always been a collector. My brother and I used to, when we were little, we'd ride our bikes out into the country and collect beer cans.
yeah.
Now, we were collectors of baseball cards and football cards and you name it. And so I've always kind of been a collector. And then it went from prints to originals. And then it went from kind of what I call contemporary to then historic. And then historic, it's kind of gone from not only historic, but the true objects themselves
Right.
rather than just the art. And then over the last 10 years, my collections have probably focused more on the objects and the Native American artists themselves, whether it's a T.C. Cannon or a Fritz Scholder or an actual object itself.
Hmm.
So, you know, it's like your collections evolve, your interests evolve. Um, you know, I've never been one to kind of sit still very long.
No,
And maybe
I
that's
understand
why
that.
I always have an interest in the journey as much as the end result.
Yes. And do you remember that first kind of expensive piece of art you bought and what it was? The one you had to think about buying and go, that's a lot of money to buy something. Now, I remember for me, it was a Maria pot and it was 325 bucks. And I was like, that's a lot
Yeah.
of money.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I remember I bought a Paul Kelly original from him, which was, you know, you know, kind of one of the first ones. And I'd say one of the first ones I really remember that I kind of took a gulp when I bought it um, was the Herman Hansen painting that's at the Scottsdale Museum called the Pony
know
Express.
exactly which one that is.
That historical painting was kind of one of the first big historical paintings I bought.
And how did you find that piece? Do you-
This was at a time when I was going out with my family almost every year out to Jackson Hole and out west. And it was at one of the galleries out in Jackson Hole.
And so you bought that, and did you feel like, oh, I want more of this, and I'm going, because once you make that purchase, I know for myself, and you allow yourself to spend that kind of money, it's easier to spend it again in the future because you feel good about it and you go, okay, I was able to get past that. Yeah, it costs a lot, but yeah, I want to keep doing that. And was it that, did you kind of ratchet up a little bit? I'm sure you're still right in the hearts of building your business and doing all that, but did you feel that a little bit at that time, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's, you know, when you start the bug,
Yeah.
you know, when the bug hits you, it hits you.
I
Um, and sometimes I wonder why it hit me.
do.
And I'm sure my wife wonders why it hit me. Um, but yeah, and then yeah, it just kind of snowballs from there, and then I got to the point where I was how do I say it? Not only was I collecting, but I was collecting with the thought of how do I build something that tells a story.
Yes.
You know, I really was never that interested in just collecting a bunch of stuff that didn't tell a story. So that's why initially I got really interested in the Lewis and Clark material, or
Yes.
I got really interested in the fur trapper material. Um, because I really wanted to feel like, you know, in my career, I spent a lot of time being in essence an analyst, and looking at data and looking at numbers and information to try to make an assessment of something. And I think for me, art is similar to that.
Mm,
You really try to analyze it and ask yourself, why am I buying this? And there's an element of the beauty of it, but for me there's an element of not just the beauty of it, but does it does it add to my portfolio, does it
mm,
add to my collection to make my story better. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've kind of gravitated to these themes that
mm.
I have.
But it's interesting. It's the story that you're trying to build, not the not the money aspect of the art. Great if it goes up, but that's not what you're shooting for. You're shooting for telling the entire story, which I find very interesting considering what your day job is just the opposite. It's the financial component. Am I right? Is that
Correct.
that's so
Correct.
interesting?
I mean, I never went into thinking that this art collection would be a pure investment. There's got to be a passion of you're
Yes.
doing it because you love it. If it makes money, fantastic. I'm also one of these guys that believes that if you treat the art like you have to, it's like a stock. Sometimes you lose money
Yeah.
and sometimes you make money. But I don't ever look at art and say, oh my God, I can't sell it unless I make a profit. Because you
Yeah.
don't do that with stocks.
No. But, and the reality is you really don't sell much anyway. You're more interested in the piece and telling the story.
Correct.
So I think all good collectors at times probably should de-access things that don't fit into their vision of what their collection is, or in your case, or my case, actually, the story. Because I do like to do like you do too. I like to buy in bulk of an artist that I really believe in, or an area that I really believe in, and not worry if I've got 100 Maynard Dixons, because I can, it's still, the story's not complete yet.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think like any great collector, you learn as you go and you can do a lot of research, but until you start collecting, you might not realize that your early days, you might have bought a bunch of what I always kind of categorize my collection as, are they A pieces? Are they B pieces? Are they C pieces? And over the early stages, as you can imagine, you buy some B's and C's. And at this stage of my life, I'm trying to buy nothing. If I do any buying now, it's like it's got to be an A piece, and I'm willing to sell the C pieces. And you're always trying to not only tell a better story, but tell a story with better quality material.
Yes. And so how do you go about learning from A, B, C? Is this a lot through self-education, reading, seeing and visiting galleries? Or do you also, at some point, you clearly get some dealers or individuals that you trust that can help you? What was that process?
Oh, I'd say it's all of those things. And I think it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of kind of going and traveling and seeing galleries and going to the auction houses and all that material. But there's also a big element of what you touched on, which is our relationship, friendship, right?
Right.
I mean, this collecting of 30 years would not be that much fun if you didn't develop friendships.
True. I agree.
And I think that's as big a part of it as any, is the friendships that you develop on any hobby. And, you know, whether it's people like Richard Lampert or you or others, the friendships that you develop are friendships that not only hopefully provide you product, but more importantly, honest relationships that say, you know, I'd avoid that if I were you, or
Yeah.
this is a great piece, or that this doesn't do much for your collection.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, when early on in my career, I was so busy with my career, I didn't have the same amount of time. Whereas when I retired, it allowed me more time to read on material, do more research on the material, spend more time with my friends to learn more about it. So it's just like the collecting. It's always evolving.
Yes. Yeah, no. And I think the best clients turn into friends. And then once that happens, you're more, at least for me personally, you're more interested in the friendship than anything else.
Yep.
So the monetary thing goes to the side, which I love,
Yep.
because I'm not trying to sell to you or make the sale. It's really more about, I want you to do well, have a great collection, and have that relationship. And I think that
Yep.
I know you've managed to do that with with dealers that you've worked with,
Yep.
which is rare. So when you're building these relationships, you're starting to build your collection at this kind of point where you're starting to put all this together. Have you thought, I'm sure you have, because obviously you think long term, you have to. Have you, what is your thought? What am I going to do with all this? What was your original goal with all this stuff? Because we're talking a lot of paintings.
Yeah. Well, it started off where as I collected, you know, fortunately, when I had my own company, I had an office with a fair amount of space where I had some of my art in my company. So my employees probably thought I was out of my mind and crazy. Um, as well as my family, but I had it there. And like anything in life, as you know, Mark, part of it is timing and part of it is luck. And I always thought I would like to maybe work with some more, museums and things. And as I was getting close to thinking about hanging it up from my career, I got a kind of a phone call out of the blue from one of the guys that Brad Richardson at Legacy Gallery. And he said, Scottsdale is building this museum. The director there is a really good guy named Mike Fox. He'd love to talk to you about your collection and what you're going to do with it and stuff. And Mike Fox flew out to the Boston area and we sat down and talked, and I really liked him. Incredibly, as you know, you've interviewed him, an incredibly engaging, knowledgeable man that, did work with Muhammad Ali, right?
Mhm.
Like not your typical Western art,
No, he's not.
director. And so he kind of convinced me that, let's work together to create an interesting environment in the Scottsdale Museum, because it was just being built,
Right.
and we could kind of work on trying to build, how do you create a good atmosphere for a collection or collectors in a museum. And so I kind of decided the timing just kind of happened. And so that fostered my relationship with the Scottsdale Museum. And then at the same time, I was doing my stuff with Charlie Fritz, and that collection was traveling around the country. And so it just kind of all percolates and ends up being what it is today.
And was that about the time you retired from your business at that time it was happening?
Well, the Scottsdale, I retired in 2014 and the museum opened in 2015.
Yes.
So the timing was just kind of good. All that stuff that was in my building and so forth just kind of moved to Scottsdale.
Yes. And so, and in Scottsdale, for those who haven't been, you have Crossroads and Courage. There's always exhibits that are going on, basically that you've curated or your collection too. And I assume once you retired and had more time to dedicate that, your buying probably increased as well.
I would say, yeah, it not really. The buying, I'd say, was probably more during my last 5 years working. Um, Once I retired, I was spending more time trying to kind of build the stories that went into all these
Got
exhibits
it.
that I did.
Got it.
And I'd say in general, my buying kind of changed a bit more towards the Native American objects
Yes.
and Curtis versus the other historical art that I had collected over the years.
And what was it about Curtis that captivated you? Because I would think you probably have the single most important Curtis collection, period. Has to be.
I have a nice collection.
Yes, but it's a
Curtis,
well
I'd
curated,
say-
thought out collection. It's deep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a deep collection. It's not just photogravures and things
Yeah.
like that. It's the whole story,
Oh, absolutely. And you kind of ask why. It gets back to, I'm incredibly fascinated by people that dedicate their lives to a project.
Yes.
And here's a guy that dedicated 30 years of his life to a project. And when it was all done, he couldn't have had worse timing in his life. He's doing this project and the Depression hits and World War I hits. And, by the time he's done, he's penniless, homeless, and forgotten.
Yeah.
And so I had seen Curtis photographs some, but I will say that my real interest in Curtis really picked up when I spent some more time with Richard Lampert at Zeppelin Lampert Gallery. And, as you know, Richard was one of the guys that kind of rediscovered Curtis's material in that bookstore here in the Boston area.
Yes.
And Richard really got me interested in some of the the non-photogravure material, like the gold tones that you kind of see
Yes.
behind my shoulder here. And so I started collecting some of those non-traditional things like the gold tones and the platinums. And then the bug hit,
Mhm.
you know, and the bug was this guy had an incredible life, meeting with J.P. Morgan and Teddy Roosevelt
Yep.
and, other characters. And so the thought was, here's a guy that spent 30 years of his life telling his story. Could I figure out a way to tell that dramatic story in the form of an exhibit that people would find interesting?
Yes.
And it just snowballed from there, and it became what it is. And I think what what I like about the exhibits that I've worked on is, I think in general I try to create an atmosphere where people learn something, but also have a sense of the scale of what that is. So for example, if you want to do a Maynard Dixon exhibit, as we did, you want to see the variety of the work he did over his lifetime.
Yes.
And with Curtis, one of the things that I also wanted to do in that exhibit was give people a sense of how creative this guy was with the many different mediums he did. It wasn't just a photogravure, it was platinums and silvers and bromides and copper plates and the glass plates that he used to make all this stuff. And I wanted people to go into that exhibit and almost be blown away by not the images themselves, because I think those are beautiful in themselves, but the depth and the breadth of the work he did over 30 years, which will never be duplicated ever.
Right.
And I think that was one of the things I wanted people to see, is like, again, like, wow, I never realized somebody could spend 30 years doing that.
Plus, he
And my
recorded all of
my attempt,
the dances and all the all the ceremonies and all that. You had
yeah.
those too. You had everything.
So that was the goal of the Curtis exhibit, was to show the breadth, the depth, and the beauty of his art. And I think he was one of those early artists, and he's taken lots of criticism, some of it justified, some of it not. But nobody can dispute the breadth of his work, and the goal of his work was to demonstrate, I believe, the beauty of that culture and the dignity of that culture in a time as it was starting to change in a very different format than what it was.
Yeah, dramatically. Yeah. There's a lot of similarities between Dixon and Curtis, I think, in
Yep.
those terms.
Yep.
And so you built this insane collection, which I love. By the way, I had to go back, I think, 4 times to that exhibit to see
Yeah.
it. And I'm not sure I really actually got to absorb it all. I realized after the first time I saw it, I have to take it in pieces because
Yeah.
there's too much to understand and take it in. So it was literally like one gallery, then this gallery and this gallery.
Yeah.
So you have, I mean, there's like 5 exhibits really in one. What do you do with such a collection? I mean, just the time and energy and effort to be able to put it together. I'm sure you also feel, like I do, a responsibility to the material.
Yeah, I would tell you, I've worked on probably 8 or 9 exhibits over the last 10 years. The Curtis one probably wiped me out in terms of mentally exhausted when it was done, for all the reasons you just said.
Yeah.
But I think like any person like you have with your Maynard Dixon, there is a sense of of obligation and a sense of responsibility to be a good steward of this collection. And I'm not that interested in creating these collections and then just selling them to the wind and kind of losing the value of what they're trying to tell. It'd be
Right.
like taking Charlie Fritz's 100 paintings and then just selling them off.
Yeah, it'd be
Um,
horrible.
I really believe something like that is a national treasure,
Yes, I
um,
agree.
because of the story it tells of American history. And I think to some degree, I would like to think that this Edward Curtis collection that I've done is similar to that. And the Edward Curtis thing is evolving, surprisingly. I'm working with a group now about spending time interviewing Native American people, asking their thoughts on the Curtis material, because that's often some of the criticism of Curtis is,
Right.
did he do this for the right reasons? And my point would be, well, let's ask the people that he's representing in this what their
Right.
thoughts are. And so, even though I have this historical photograph collection, I still think there's ways to make it even more relevant for today. Um, and so I'm attempting to be a good steward of it. And hopefully, by doing things like that, it will have another life that maybe another museum or two or three will be interested in taking it, showing it, and having it be different than the last exhibit of the Edward Curtis. So
And
it
I think,
doesn't feel like the same exhibit.
yes, and that definitely will do it. There's no doubt about it, because they'll bring in contemporary indigenous voices in a
Yeah,
way that we can't comment on, and but they can, especially if they're their relatives, which I know I have
yeah,
one guy here in Tucson, his great grandfather is one of the people that's
yep,
in, and he loves it. He's like, I'm thrilled to have it. I'm love to
yep.
see it. And I'm sure others maybe don't, but having that dialogue just adds granularity and contemporaneous to something that's, 130 years old.
Yep.
And I think
Absolutely.
it's important that you look at those and you're doing that. I think that's, again, as your collection has evolved, I think you too, as a collector, probably have evolved in how you see certain things as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here again, I think I, my daughter has had a big influence on my collection. She's an art history major and got her master's in art history, and I get that element of discussions around the dinner table.
Right.
But even little things and big things like a greater appreciation of original Native American artists like T.C. Cannon and Fritz Scholder and Earl Biss, and having a recognition that there's many different voices that can speak about American history. And I look at the West as one of the greatest, quote, American history elements and stories we have. It's our history,
Mm-hmm.
a history that's got good stories and bad stories and ugly stories, but it truly is our story. The West is our story. And I think when I say our, I mean it's many different parties, from the Native Americans to the Europeans to whoever else explored that Western expedition process, both as a settler, someone conquesting, taking land that was not originally theirs, and moving through a process that recognized that there's many stories to be told. And one of the missions I believe that I've had in all of my exhibits is to try to tell a story that's got good, bad, and ugly. I don't try to idolize people or groups, nor do I attempt to demonize them.
Mm.
Um, and so, that's one of the things I've hoped that I try to bring, especially to an exhibit like the Curtis exhibit.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you have all these different exhibits too. I mean, you have a very strong Taos founder collection as well. And I'm assuming there
Yep,
was something about those artists. I'm sure Richard was influencing on that too, because he had access and he's a specialist in that field. But what was it
yep.
about the Taos founders that you gravitated to? Because you really do have a very strong collection in that.
Well, I think it's again this element of, here's a group of artists that kind of came to a region out west that they fell in love with because it was such a beautiful place with such a feeling of freedom and creativity and in nature with these unbelievable skies that they kind of formed an art form that was very, very different than anything else that had ever been really done.
Mm.
And so that Taos Society of group of artists really created a new form of American art that was very different than anything else, like jazz, like a new form of art.
Mm-hmm.
And I, again, just like an artist that spends 30 years of their career building something, I love these groups or people that are willing to go outside the norm to build something that everybody else isn't doing.
Mm.
Um,
Is there an area you would like to build that you haven't?
uh, I wouldn't say there's necessarily an area. I would say there's still plenty of exhibits I would like to work on and tell some stories. So I would say that in that regard, yes, there are things I still would like to work on,
Any of
but
those
not
you
a
want to,
particular art form.
any of those you want to share?
Uh, I would love to do an exhibit. You know, the American Indian School in Santa Fe.
Yes.
You know, a couple of the great artists there, as I mentioned before, were T.C. Cannon, Fritz Scholder, and Earl Biss.
Yes.
They were three friends. But a lot of people don't realize, like, one of my favorite American artists is a guy named Wayne Thiebaud, who you know Wayne Thiebaud, kind of a pop artist
Yeah.
like you know Andy Warhol. Well, he along with being a great artist, he was also a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
One of his students was Fritz Scholder,
Yep.
a Native American. And then Fritz Scholder was a teacher, and one of his students was
TC.
T.C.
Yep.
Cannon.
Yep.
So I'd love to have someday this kind of a whole story about teacher student.
Ah.
And, you know, I think, you know, whether it's Wayne Thiebaud teaching Fritz Scholder helping T.C. Cannon, I think that would be an interesting story to tell. Because I also
Yes.
think that that Indian school in Santa Fe probably has not gotten as much recognition as it should.
Yeah.
And those early Native American artists, like those guys, and how important they were. And you know, you look at Fritz Scholder and T.C. Cannon. You know, T.C. Cannon was the youngest artist to ever have his own exhibit at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. when he was what, 28 years old?
Yeah. Something like that. He died at like 32, I think.
Died at 32. So he didn't do a lot of work in his career.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the kinds of stories I think would be fun to spend more time on. Another couple, I would love to do one on just the Plains Indian material that I have, in terms of the beauty of the Plains Indian material.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a handful more of exhibits I'd love to work on, but there's only so much time, and you know.
Well, that's the problem. At some point you realize, uh-oh, time's going away, and I have this collection. There's things I want to do. And where does the collection go to? I mean, that's always going to be the big one. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
And like we were talking about these, you know, I have other collections besides Western art, so I'm busy
Doesn't
working on
surprise
some of
me.
those things.
Yeah, like what? What kind of other things do you collect?
Well, I have a very, I think an important American duck decoy
Oh
collection.
yeah, those are cool.
And I'm working with 3 museums to have a traveling exhibit of part of my decoy collection over the next 3 to 4 years. So I'm kind of working on things like that. And, you know, I have some charities that I'm involved in. And so I've got other things besides this.
Right.
And, you know, as you touched on, as I get older, I also recognize that this has been a great hobby. but there's also a stewardship issue, as you mentioned. And with that goes, it's also a burden. I mean,
Yes, that's true.
yes, it brings, joy, and you hope you can share it with others, but there's also an element of caring for it, ensuring it, storing it, making sure that it's properly respected.
Yes.
And that takes up more time and effort than I ever dreamed it would when I started this journey of mine.
I bet. So you've been doing this journey now for about almost 30 years, would you say, pretty much
Yeah,
collecting?
25 years, give or take.
And so maybe you could share with other collectors out there because, you've really invested a lot of energy and effort and taken it at the what I consider kind of the top level of what you can do as a collector, where you not only collect, but you show, you provide history, education, all that. What are some of the things that you maybe have learned to do, and some of the things you can tell people what they need to avoid? Because there are lots of pitfalls that you've gone,
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced every one of them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Uh, that's a tough question, Mark.
I know.
In terms of learning, I would say um, find something you enjoy. Don't expect to make money from it. Um, find something you enjoy. Don't assume ever that anybody else will care as much as you do.
That's good. I like that.
Um, attempt to work with people, whether it's dealers or other collectors or artists or even museums, with zero expectations that everybody will like what you do. Because it's just like any other hobby. Some people will not have no interest in it. Some people will think you have the greatest hobby in the world,
Yeah.
and other people will not care one bit. And some people will criticize you.
Yes.
And you have to have a thick enough skin to say, I'm doing it because I think it's the right thing for me, and I'm trying to share this with others. And those others don't mean that you're going to have 100% in agreement that it's a great exhibit.
Yes.
Like I think of those 9 exhibits I've worked on at the Scottsdale Museum. I think most people would have said those 9 exhibits were great, but I can tell you, I'm sure there are some people that went in and said, what a waste of time that was. So have a thick enough skin.
Yeah. Yeah. Take the ego out of it as well. Yeah.
You got to take your ego out. And I think you have to recognize that every organization is different, and museums have their own politics and their own process. And, I came from a business world where I did my analysis, I did my decision making, but then you make a decision and you live with it.
Mm.
And that decision is to some degree a decision that you can make relatively accurately and thoroughly, but relatively quickly. And some museums don't operate like that.
Yeah. Most of them.
So you have to be willing to recognize that it can take time, and it can take a process, and it can take a journey. And that journey, that Scottsdale in general, when Mike Fox was the director there, he and Tricia Loescher, the curator, they were great. They worked with me and kind of allowed me some freedom to come up with these ideas for these exhibits and then let me run with them.
Yeah.
And help me along the way. But, lots of museums aren't necessarily like that. And so you got to recognize that every museum is different and every museum's going to have their own approach.
Right.
And your approach might be something you think, why don't they just do that? And you can get frustrated if you think it's going to happen that way.
Yeah. So it probably helps the fact that you ran a business, a big business, and had to deal with a lot of different personalities and budgets and all that. So you could at least
Yeah.
relate to it. I don't think a lot of people
Yeah.
could even relate to that, maybe.
No, I think when you have your own business, I think you quickly realize that there's many interrelationships that go into it, and all of those can have an influence on the outcome.
Yes.
And that outcome is sometimes an outcome that you don't always like,
Mm,
and you don't always agree with, but you've got to manage through it. And I always used to tell my employees, I can take good news, I can take bad news, but what I don't like is surprises.
mm.
And I think to some degree, that's the mindset I go into most of these things is tell me the good news, tell me the bad news, but don't surprise me.
Yes.
And like anything else, sometimes organizations can surprise you, or
Yes.
people can surprise you.
Yeah, people can. Yeah, I have a
Uh,
similar thing for my work when somebody starts. I always say, you are going to break something. It's okay. When you do, just show it to me and tell me. I'm not going
yeah,
to get angry. Things happen, but if you don't show me, I won't know. And then that's the surprise. So just
yep,
it's going to happen and don't feel, don't freak out. Even if it's expensive, it does happen. And it
yeah,
does.
yep. So, but in general, um, this is a process where I think if you go into it with the rationale that you are doing it because you enjoy it,
Mm,
you are attempting to do it to bring not only joy to yourself but to others, whether it's your spouse or a friend or a colleague like you or Richard or other people I've gotten to know over the years. You know, those are the relationships, those are the reasons why it becomes an evolving process, but also is still hopefully fun.
yes.
Once you lose the joy in this, then it becomes nothing but a burden.
Mm.
And then it becomes, okay, how do I get rid of this
Yeah, how do
stuff?
I extricate myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that does happen sometimes. Dealers will burn clients by being unethical or doing weird things, and they're just like, nope, I'm out. I don't want to deal with this kind of behavior.
Yeah.
And
And I think you have to kind of go into it. I think it's like life. You know, in most cases, your spouse is for me, it is. My spouse is my best friend.
yes,
I don't live a life where I try to be friends with 5,000 people. I really believe in your lifetime, if you can have 3 to 10 great friends,
yeah, you're
pretty successful.
very successful actually.
And I think to some degree, I look at the art world the same way. If you can develop a handful of friendships, whether that's with dealers or artists,
Mhm.
like I've gone on trips with Charlie Fritz and Richard Lampert. I've done these Lewis and Clark journeys of mine with them, and those memories are every bit as important as the collecting of the art. And I think most people that really are into a subject tend to find that journey, that collecting, and the relationships you build are every bit as fun as the art that you hang on the wall.
They're more granular for sure, I think.
Yeah,
And what do you
yeah.
want people to remember about you as a collector? What do you think is your
Oh,
legacy if
I,
and I know it's a
I,
hard question, it's almost an unfair question, but I'm sure there's something there you would like that, to be he told the story, whatever it was.
um, I
Wow.
would like, I'd like my family to remember me. I'm not sure I really expect anybody else to remember me. Um, I think, if I had to say what would people say about me when it's all said and done, I'd like to think they said he had a passion to tell stories and share it with other people.
Yes,
But I'm not looking to be remembered.
I get it.
I'd rather have the art be remembered. I'd
Yeah,
like to think that I'd like to think that I helped create an atmosphere where more people have had a greater appreciation of Edward Curtis or Lewis and Clark or Charlie Fritz, and, Bodmer and Catlin than before me.
Yes.
But in terms of Tim Peterson,
Hmm.
not expecting much of a memory.
Hmm. You'll be wrong, my friend, on that one, though,
Yeah,
because
I don't know.
you will, because when you do these things, it affects people, and sometimes it affects people so deeply that it changes their entire life. And, I know you're not a big one to going, look at me or my name's on everything. You don't care about that, which I really respect about you. But I do think you make a big difference, especially at this time of supporting Western and Native arts to keep it at the forefront, because you could have easily, living in Boston, gone and go, yeah, I'm going to collect contemporary art, and do that whole thing. But you didn't do that. You followed your roots, what interests you, which was history and telling a story. And the story you wanted to tell is one of America.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you've done that quite nicely, as a
Well,
matter
thank you. Thank you.
of.
I hope, I think this is where, I have teamed up with, on like the Lewis and Clark thing, the Charlie Fritz thing, that's with Johnny Morris's Wonders of Wildlife Museum. It's been there for the last 4 years. And, that place has over 1 million visitors a year,
Wow.
which is just shocking, right?
What?
And a lot of people have asked me, why would you put an art collection in this Wonders of Wildlife Museum? And my point is, because an audience of maybe 1 million people a year will get a chance to see something that they maybe didn't think about looking at before.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's what you need to do, is you need to kind of go outside the norm and try to think about, why would you want to have your stuff shown at Scottsdale or at Wonders of Wildlife? Because you want to share it with other people.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
And that's how you do it. And you can't do it by always doing the norm, You got to go outside the comfort zone a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, you do. But when you do that, it allows you to see the world a little differently. And and then that's where the wow factor comes in, because you probably get a lot more wows at that place that has 1 million than you would at a wing in some Eastern museum where people just don't get it or understand it or don't want to, you know? So,
It's a different audience, and it's an
completely.
audience that I think has, in many cases, been kind of underappreciated. And I think the Western story, like I said before, is such an American story that I think at times it gets underrepresented by some organizations and institutions.
Yeah.
And I think it's our story, as I
Yeah.
said before.
Yeah.
And I like telling our story. It doesn't mean it's always pretty. I think one of the things I've tried to again do is um, recognize that, some of the things that happened to the Native American culture was terrible. Um, but it's still, you can't deny that it was our history. And I think the people that in today's world that try to kind of like almost deny history really aren't going to learn from history. I know another person you interviewed was Larry Peterson,
Yeah.
who did the Curtis book recently, and have a lot of respect for him as a author. And he's got this great quote, and I use it quite a bit because I think it's so powerful, which is, history is more about the future than the past. History is bred for the journey. Bred for the journey. And think about that. I think you need food to fuel your body to continue to live and grow. And I think we need history to do that same thing. I think if
Mhm.
we don't learn from history, we don't study history, we as a society might not learn from history
Yeah. Can't grow.
and grow. And I think that's a powerful statement.
Mm.
And I think that's what I'm attempting to convey in the exhibits I help put on.
Well, I think that kind of sums up everything. I mean, there's so many questions. I mean, I do have one question that people ask me all the time, and I hate it because it's almost unanswerable. What is there a piece or couple pieces that are your favorite in your collection? Right, I know.
The answer is the answer is yes, but no.
Yes.
If I had to say, will I always appreciate that first Paul Kelly painting that I got, that because of my friendship with him and because he was the one that got me interested in that print when I was 12 years old?
Yes.
Yes. I own, as you know, the original Meriwether Lewis tomahawk that was on his possession when he died, which is shown at the Scottsdale Museum.
Yes.
That's an important object, not only because of its historical significance, but because of my love of American history and Lewis and Clark.
Yes.
That's an important piece for me. And I'd say that Pony Express Herman Hansen, because it was kind of one of those first significant pieces I
Yeah, it's a
have.
pivotal piece.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I would say now I own some of these T.C. Cannon paintings, and because of the significance, I believe he represented to American history and perception of how the Native American culture can look at history different than other people, and how he painted it. I think that those TC cannons, I think, are incredibly important in not only Native American history, but American history.
Yeah.
And so those paintings, I think, also mean quite a bit to the Peterson family.
I agree. Those are my favorites of what you have, interestingly enough. I mean, that I know of. I don't know all your things. And those are at the Boston Fine Arts Museum on loan?
I have many of the TC cannons on loan at the MFA in Boston,
Yeah.
yes, along with some other stuff.
Yeah, so that's alone is a reason to go see the museum, to go see those cannons. They're so rare, you know. The modern museum only has one,
Yeah.
you know, two guns of Rookra. So, you know, you have, yeah, I agree with that. Is there anything you would like to share that we haven't talked about as we finish up?
No, I really appreciate your time, Mark. You know, you and I have been friends for many years. I can't thank you enough for your passion for the arts and for the storytelling and the Maynard Dixon. As you know, Maynard Dixon has always been one of my favorites. I've got the big mural.
Yeah.
And I think here again, this is where you can tell stories about people like Maynard Dixon that would just shock most people. You know, just the other day I had a meeting with an art museum, and I told them about your story that you told me about how Maynard Dixon was the one that created the color for the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
And you realize here's an artist, a Western artist, and yet he had an influence on American culture and American history that people don't even know about.
Yeah.
And think what the Golden Gate Bridge would be if it was just a steel or a gray structure.
Yep. And it's because he knows color and art and form and creativity.
Yeah. And I bet there's lots of stories like that on many artists that people don't know about. Like Paul Kelly working with NASA in terms of drawing and painting Apollo 11.
Sure.
And so those are the kind of stories that I think are fascinating, that really have an impact on American history.
Yes.
And that's what I hope to send messages on.
Well, and I would say in your collection, there are probably many stories that have not been told yet, that if a researcher spends time with, will go, oh, I see something that that no one knows. For Curtis would be one example, because you have so much. There's probably a dissertation there easily in that alone. And by putting it together, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Joe, just a little aside, I haven't, everybody had problem, most people with an interest in art know who Edward Hopper is,
Yes.
right? Well, some people don't realize Edward Hopper actually, when early in his life, he actually went out west and he did some Western things. And I have a little Edward Hopper Western painting.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody thinks of Edward Hopper ever having painted something about a Native American. And I have something like that. So those are
Yes.
the little tidbits of information that people would be, I think, sometimes fascinated by.
Yes, that would go along with your legacy of, the teachers to the artists that we're talking about, with Wayne Thiebaud and Shoulder and T.C. Cannon. Hopper
Yeah.
fits in that same way as well, who he knew,
Yeah.
they knew Dixon as well. It'd be very
Yeah.
interesting to take all the names of all the artists that you have and see how they all fit in as a puzzle. And I bet they do.
They probably do.
Yep.
And that's the fascinating thing,
Yep.
like that's the thing that makes people kind of realize, simple things like Andy Warhol and, Chihuly. Everybody kind of knows of Chihuly glass sculpture. What people probably don't realize is Andy Warhol and Chihuly had a love of Native American Southwestern
Yep, they
art.
did. Yep. They did.
And that had a big influence on some of their collections and some of their own art styles.
Absolutely.
And so that's another exhibit I think would be amazing, is to have something about artists that are kind of in the common culture of America, but yet they were influenced by Native American material like
Yes.
Chihuly and Andy Warhol and
Donald Judd.
others.
Donald Judd, Joseph Albers, textiles, both
Yeah,
important. All these
yeah.
guys. Jasper John collected Navajo textiles. No, I mean, it would be fun. And you probably have it all. You have a lot of it already in your collection. It's just having somebody go through it and figuring out those threads, which probably should be you, because you probably have the most intimate relationship with the collection. But it would be
I don't
fun.
have the time anymore, Mark.
No, I
So,
know. That's the problem. We run out of time, is
yeah,
it? No, I get it.
exactly.
I'm
So
lucky because I have my son to
but
help with that.
yeah, but I again want to say thank you for what you've done for the art world, for the Maynard Dixon legacy that continues with your museum, and the fact that you are sharing these kinds of stories through your podcast and others that hopefully will perk interest from people to not only learn more about these stories, but pass them on. And I
Yes,
can't thank you enough for doing that.
I appreciate that. I mean, that's probably whatever my legacy is probably these stories. It's not all the other stuff. It's literally capturing these voices that other people can go back to historically and go, because, right, we need history to move forward, to go, okay, this is what this individual did with his life, i.e., 30 plus years of collecting and telling stories. That's an important person. History can determine that, but because we have these to rely on, I do think they probably have more meaning than anything else that I'm doing with anything else, quite frankly. So I appreciate that you get it.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yep. All right. We'll be talking soon. As you
All
know,
right.
that I have a few things we're working on. And
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy and it's, and just sharing. It's not easy to share some of these things, it's, because you put it out there to the world. And I do think it's very important that people get to hear your voice specifically.
Oh, well, thank you,
So,
and I appreciate it. You
yep,
have a great week.
I will. Thank you. All right, Tim Peterson. Adios.